Okay, so Rabbi say we're on DAF Chaf Beis Amud Aleph. Yesterday, we talked about an interesting scenario about an Atzitz Hanakov, a flower pot or plant trough. We'll call it just a flower pot that has holes or is porous on the bottom. So it's getting halachically nourishment from the ground. So you have an interesting paradox almost, that on the one hand, the plastic or pottery of the flower pot is considered to be detached from the ground, but the contents of the flower pot are actually growing from the ground. Now we learned, how does this relate to the laws of Ksuva? So we know that you're not allowed to write a get on anything that's attached to the ground and then detach it and give it to the woman. The reason is, as we had learned yesterday, because there's a chisaron, like Reuven I think had pointed this out, there's a chisaron, you remember we had discussed this, there's a chisaron in the get if there's any action that needs to be performed in between the writing and the giving. Right? That's the issue. It's not so much that the issue is that the get has to be detached from the ground because of some technical issue that the Gemara had discussed yesterday. The issue is that if you need to do an action in between the writing and the giving, uprooting, so then that invalidates the get, because the Torah has the two verbs v'chosav v'nosan. You have to be able to write, and immediately after writing, give it. If you need to do something else between writing and giving, then it's not a kosher get. So here you have a scenario. Let's say a man writes a get on the surface of the flower pot and then picks it up and gives it to his wife. Well, that's completely kosher because there's no uprooting involved. Even though the contents of the flower pot are growing, so to speak, from the ground, there's no technical uprooting because you're not pulling anything from the ground, because the only issue is nourishment that the seeds are getting in the flower pot, but there's no physical connection between the two. And therefore it's perfectly legal. The flower pot is viewed as metaltalin. It's not something that's mechuber lekarka, and therefore you can use that. If you write a get on a leaf that is growing from the flower pot, so technically you could also pick up the whole thing and give it to your wife. However, Rava in the Gemara had said midurabanan, that's puzzle, because we're worried that you won't pick up the whole flower pot, but instead will pull the leaf off of the branch, and since the branch is growing from the ground and you're pulling it off, that will invalidate the get because you've done an action of uprooting in between the writing and the giving. Now this leads us to a whole series of issues having to do with flower pots. Okay, so atzitz shel echad uzraim shel echad. Let's say you have a flower pot where the pot belongs to one person and the seeds that are growing in the soil in the pot belong to another person. So this is just a what-if kind of question. Mocher bal atzitz lebal zraim. If, let's say, the owner of the pot wishes to transfer ownership from himself to the owner of the seeds, and he says, you know what, I'm going to give you everything. You own the seeds, I own the pot, I'm going to give you the pot, I'm going to transfer ownership to you. So the halacha is kevin shemashach kana. So all the person who's going to acquire the flower pot has to do is to pull it, either pick it up or to pull it if it's much larger, it's very heavy. He just has to do an act of meshicha, and he's kona the flower pot, which has a din of metaltalin, has a din of chattel. However, machal bal zroim lebal atzitz lo kana ad sheyachzik b'zroim. But let's say the reverse is true. Let's say the owner of the seeds wants to transfer ownership of the seeds to the owner of the flower pot. In that situation, the seeds have a din of karka. It's nourishing from the ground. It's growing from the ground, so to speak. And therefore, you can't just pick up the flower pot in order to acquire the seeds. You have to do a kinyan that works for real estate. A kinyan that works for real estate is making a chazaka, doing some form of work in the soil itself. You take one of those, what's the handheld? Is it a spade?
Trowel.
A trowel? Is that what it is? A trowel or a spade?
No, spade is
Spade is a shovel. He's talking about a hand thing.
Yeah, a hand thing.
a
A trowel?
They're using with bricklayers too.
That's I thought.
Or is a trowel that they use?
I thought you use it's for concrete, for bricks.
You're right.
So it's something else. It's a handheld. I thought it was like a handheld spade.
Yeah.
But any event, but whatever that thing is that I'm talking about, and that none of us have green
hand
thumbs.
shovel.
That a hand thing, right? You'll turn over the soil a little bit. That demonstrates ownership, and that's how you're kona the seeds. Okay. So atzitz uzroim shel echad umachon la'acher. Now let's look at the third case. What happens if there's one owner of the flower pot and the seeds, and he wishes to transfer everything over to a third party? So hechzik bisroim kana atzitz. So as long as the person makes a chazaka in the soil where the seeds are growing, so he's kona everything. He's kona everything, both the soil, the seeds, and the pot. And the reason is because there's something called the kinyan agav, that you can be kona, when you're kona real estate, you're kona everything that is ancillary to that real estate. Normally, when we talk about this, we talk about a person acquiring a plot of land, and the things that are resting on the land. So let's say I sell a courtyard, and there's lawn furniture in the courtyard. So as soon as I'm kind of the courtyard, I'm kind of the lawn furniture that's in the courtyard. Here it's a little different. Here it's the flower pot that's surrounding the soil. Once I've made a kinyan in the soil and the seeds, I'm kind of the surrounding holder of that soil. And that's why our sages tell us that when you acquire real estate, you can acquire chattel concomitantly with that real estate if it's connected in some way. Now, what is the method of kinyan? Bekesef uvishtar uvechazaka. Through the methods of kinyan that apply to real estate, which is either with paying cash, with writing a contract, or doing some form of malacha in the soil to show ownership. Now, if, however, hechazik ba'atzitz, af atzitz lokana at sheyachzik bisroim. If, however, you do an improper method of kinyan on the chattel part of the flower pot, which means, let's say you start sanding down the flower pot, okay? So you figure, well, if I can use a little handheld spade to cultivate the soil and that shows ownership, let me sand down the flower pot, that'll show ownership as well. That's not a valid method of kinyan. Since the flower pot does not have a din of real estate, it has a din of metaltalin, of chattel, you have to do a kinyan that works for chattel, not for real estate. And therefore, doing just an act of malacha on the flower pot is insufficient, and therefore you've been kona nothing. You would have to pick up everything or pull everything in order to be able to at least be kona the flower pot. Now, let's look at another issue. Nakvo ba'aretz v'nofo b'chutz la'aretz. Let's say I now have a flower pot, or like a really large flower pot that's holding a tree, okay? And it's right on the border of Israel and Syria. Now just imagine that, right? Okay? And I want to know, does the produce that's growing from this tree, does it have the status of produce of Eretz Yisrael, or does it have the status of produce of Chutz La'aretz? The nafkamina, the ramification would be, is it chayiv in Trumas and Ma'asos or not? I'm not sure wherever this border is, okay? It may not be Syria. It may have to be somewhere in the Sinai desert. Whatever it is, it's in between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. So Abaya Omar Basar Nakvo Azlinan, Rava Omar Basar Nofo Azlinan. So Abaya says you go according to where the flower pot is resting. If the flower pot is resting in Eretz Yisrael, so then everything that's growing, even if the branches are protruding into Chutz La'aretz, all of the produce has a din of Eretz Yisrael produce. And Rabbi says, no, you go according to where it's actually growing above ground. So if the produce is growing above ground in Chutz La'aretz, even if the flower pot is resting in Eretz Yisrael, so then it has the din of Chutz La'aretz. Now, b'da'ashros kol yama lo pligi. The Gemara wants to clarify, this is only an issue when the plant has not taken root in the ground, but it's still just growing from the soil in the flower pot. And the only thing is that the flower pot is porous on the bottom so that there is some nutrition, but there's no roots that have been put down. Ki pligi b'delo ashrosh. The only machlokes is when it hasn't taken root. But if it's taken root, says the Gemara, everyone would agree that you go according to where it's rooted. And if it's rooted in Eretz Yisrael, regardless if the fruit is hanging over into Chutz La'aretz, you would treat it as Eretz Yisrael. So now the Gemara says, oh really? Uveda ashrosh lo pligi? Are you sure that there's no machlokas when it's taken root? V'hatanan, look at the following Mishnah. Shtei ginos, zu al gav zu v'yerek bintayim. Very interesting scenario. You've got two people who own property adjacent to each other, both own farmland, and it's split level. It's split level so that you got a guy that owns the lowland and a guy who owns the highland. And there's a step, a vertical step, that divides the property. Now, who owns the soil of that vertical step? Is it the guy in the lowland or is it the guy in the highland? Well, it's the guy in the highland, because when you look at it from a vertical standpoint, the guy in the lowland owns everything on this side. The guy on the highland owns everything on this side, including the surface of the step. What if you have tomatoes growing out of this vertical step?
What do you mean out of? You mean?
Yeah, they're growing sideways. You put a tomato plant on this vertical piece of soil, and the tomato's growing out this way. It's growing out horizontally in a vertical piece of soil. Okay? So the question is, who does the tomato belong to? Does it belong to the guy in the highland who owns the soil, or does it belong to the guy in the lowland where the tomato is protruding into?
You say tomato.
Yeah.
Tomatoes go up.
What?
Tomatoes go up. They grow up.
No.
You can-
This is in the airspace of the low guy.
It's in the airspace of the lowland guy.
Right.
Yeah, of course. Now, if it's going to curve up, it's still going to be in the airspace of the lowland guy. But that's the shaila. The shaila is, whose tomato is it? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir Omer Shel Elyon, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shel Tachton. Rabbi Meir says it belongs to the highland guy, and Rabbi Yehuda says it belongs to the lowland guy. Now, the Gemara's question is basically this. You just told me that when a plant is taken root in soil, everyone agrees you go according to where the soil is. And so why is there a machlokas here? Shouldn't everyone agree that it belongs to the highland guy? So the Gemara says, Hasam Kiddikatani time. I'll tell you why. That case is unique. Because Amar Reb Meir Mayim Yirtza Elyon Litolis Afaro Ein Kan Yerek. Because let's look at the reasoning that's brought in the Mishnah over there. Rabbi Meir says the reason why it belongs to the highland guy is because it's his soil. If he takes away his soil, there can be no tomato. So it's obviously his tomato. But Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mayim Yirtza Tachton Lamalos Es Ginaso Afer Ein Kan Yerek. But Rabbi Yehuda's counter argument is, what if the lowland guy were to fill that airspace where that step is with soil? He could do that, and therefore, because he's the owner of that airspace where the tomato's growing out of, he owns that tomato. But that's a unique situation where you've got two different levels of ground. But everyone would agree, when you've only got one level of ground, and the plant is rooted in the ground, and now the fruit is growing above ground, then you can't say that wherever the branch is growing determines the ownership. It's where the root is growing. Where the plant is growing, there's no one can say you can go above ground and fill up that area. So therefore, that argument doesn't apply in other cases where you're not dealing with split-level soil.
Why couldn't you do that? You could. You could take soil and pile it up on flat ground on your side.
You could, although the Gemara, it would seem from the Gemara that that's not fair. That's not a fair argument if everything is at one level. It's only a fair argument when you're dealing with a split level to begin with and something's growing out of the area of the split. That's where you could say, well, if I want to, I can bring my soil up to your level. But if everything already is one level, then you can't make that same argument. And that's why the Gemara says everyone would agree that in our case, you go according to where the plant is rooted, not to where it's growing out. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute, we still have a problem. Let me show you another brisa. V'hatanya ilan mikzaso ba'aretz u'mikzaso b'chutz la'aretz tevel v'chulin muravin zebazet divrei Rabbi. We have a brisa that says that if you have a tree, half of it is growing in Eretz Yisrael, half of it is growing in chutz la'aretz. According to Rabbi, the produce that is going to be gleaned from that tree is a mixture of both a tevel, meaning that it has to be tithed, and chulin, produce that does not have to be tithed, because some of it is from Eretz Yisrael, some of it is from Chutz La'aretz. And it's all considered mixed together. Now, what's the nafkamina? Of course, you have to tithe all of it, but the nafkamina is that you can't use this produce to tithe on other produce that is for sure from Eretz Yisrael, because that's like tithing min hasafik al havadai, taking safek produce and tithing it for vadai produce, which is a no-no. That's Rebbe. So therefore, you have to tithe the produce of the tree by itself. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, Hagodel b'chiyuv chayev, Hagodel b'pater patur. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, whatever is growing in the obligatory place, meaning in Eretz Yisrael, has to be tithed, and whatever's growing outside of that obligatory place does not have to be tithed. And so, my lav mixas nofo be'eretz and mixas nofo b'chutz la'aretz. And therefore, the Gemara's assumption is that according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, you look at the produce that's growing above ground, right? And you see whatever branches are into chutz la'aretz is pater from trumas and maasros, and whatever branches are growing into Eretz Yisrael is chayiv. So you see that even when the tree is rooted in the ground, even in partially in Eretz Yisrael, we always go according to the branches, not according to the roots. That's the kasha that the Gemara poses, and the Gemara says, lo, miksa shroshin baretz and miksa shroshin b'chutz la'aretz. No, the Gemara says no one uses the criteria of the branches when the tree is rooted in the ground. You always use the criterion of the roots and the roots alone. But here we're talking about a situation where some of the roots are growing in Eretz Yisrael, some of the roots are growing outside of Eretz Yisrael. And here's the issue. My time at Rabbi Shimon Gamliel demafsik tsunema. The machlokus is in a situation where there is a rock that is growing underneath the tree, exactly at the border between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. Clearly, that clearly divides the roots of Eretz Yisrael from Chutz La'aretz. In other words, everyone would agree that when there's no division in the roots below ground, then you have a mixture, and there's no way to know which produce is from Eretz Yisrael, which produce is from Chutz La'aretz. It's all considered together. It's all mixed together. You could even have one apple that is partially an Eretz Yisrael apple and partially Chutz La'aretz apple. It's all mixed together, right? But here you have a situation where there's a rock that divides the roots that are in the Eretz Yisrael side from the roots that are in the Chutz La'aretz side. And so therefore, my time at Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that here you have a situation where, did you ever do that science experiment in 6th grade or 4th grade, whenever it was? You take a piece of celery, you cut the bottom in half, and then you put it in 2 glasses of water, one with red food coloring and one with blue food coloring. This is exactly the situation that the Gemara is describing. Half of this piece of celery will grow, will absorb the water, and it'll become red, and the other half will become blue. That's the way Rabbi Shimon Gamliel looks at it. He says you got the roots separated, and so the whole nourishment of the system will be divided. And so you look at half of the tree being as part of Eretz Yisrael, and half of the tree as being part of Chutz La'aretz. But it's based on the roots. However, Rebbe says not that way. Rebbe's argument is, my time at the Rebbe, Dahadri Aravi, because afterwards, Rebbe says, look, it's true that a rock is dividing them in the root system, but once the nutrition gets into the trunk, it's going to mix together afterwards, and therefore you'll get purple, or a mixture of Chutz La'aretz and Eretz Yisrael. B'maika miflagi marsover avira mevalbil marsover hailachude v'koi v'hailachude koi. And the machlokus is: do you view it as that piece of celery where the blue and the red stay separate, or do you view it in a tree system where everything gets mixed up in the trunk and the branches, so that every single fruit is a mixture? That's the machlokus Mishum Gamliel and Rebbe. But in the final analysis of the Gemara's maskana is that when the tree is rooted in the ground, or the plant is rooted in the ground, everyone agrees that you go according to the roots and not according to the branches. Okay? Let's go weiter. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer v'chulei. We go to the next part of our Mishnah, which talks about the substance that the get can be written upon. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira said it's very important to make sure that the shtar, the get itself, cannot be forged. So if it's a piece of parchment that has been previously erased, there's no way to verify that after the person wrote the get and gave it to his wife, maybe the wife erased all of the text and rewrote it. Let's say perhaps in the original get there was a tanai. The tanai is, this get is only your get on the condition that you give me $1 million, or whatever the tanai was. right? Or that you get out of town, right? So let's say she rewrites the get without the Tanai in it. So that's why Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says you have to use a substance which is klaf, he says, that has been processed and is also been stained with gallnut resin, so that in the event that there was any erasure, you would be able to detect it. But the Chachamim say that's not necessary. So the Gemara now says, Amar Reb Chia bar Asi Mishmei Deula, Gimel Orosein. There are 4 types of animal skin that are not completely processed. That's the way Rashi learns. There are 3 levels before the full process of what we call klaf, and they all have halachic status because they all have utility even before they come to the final status. Now, what are the 3 pre-full process types of skin called? Matzah, chayfa, and diftera. Those are the names. Now, matzah kemishma'o delo maliach udelo kamiach udelo afitz. So, what is matzah? Matzah is like what we know as matzah. It's something that is bland and has not been processed with anything. So therefore, it's got no salt, it's got no flour, and it's got no gallnut resin to stain it. So it's really just a plain piece of hide that has not been processed at all chemically. So what could it be used for? So that's the Gemara's next question. L'may hilchasa lahotzah Shabbos. We need to know about this kind of hide for the laws of Shabbos, because if whatever its utility is, the halacha is that any object that has utility, if you carry it outside on Shabbos, you've done a malacha. So what kind of utility does an unprocessed piece of animal hide have? The kamashi uro kidekatani Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda. How large does it have to be to have utility? Kedelatzer mishkol ketana, enough to be able to act as a pouch for a small weight. And here we need to know. Gemara says this many times. When merchants used to have a set of metal weights that they used to weigh things with for the customer. Now, you always needed to store your weights at the end of the day in a soft pouch, because if you didn't, if it was rubbing constantly against hard surfaces, it would eventually corrode, and then you'd eventually either shortchange your customer, or some other thing is going to happen. So therefore, or you'll end up giving your customer too much merchandise, I guess, and the merchant therefore doesn't want to. You'll give him too little, right? He says it's a kilo, right? Oh, wait a minute, that's not a real kilo. That's what my weight says, right? But it says vikama. So how large of a pouch do you make? What is the smallest weight that you use to store in a pouch? So Rabbi ki riva de pumpadisa. A quarter of a pumpadisa weight, like as 1/16 of a pumpadisa weight, is the smallest pouch. So therefore, this kind of matzah leather you would use to make pouches with. Now, chayfa de maliach velo kamiach velo afitz. The next level up is called the chayfa leather, which has been salted, but does not have any flour added nor gallnut resin. And lamay hilchasa. And what do you use it for? Lahotzah Shabbos. Also, the ramification is for knowing how much I have to transport in order to do a malacha, the kama shi'uro, and how much is that? Kiditnan or kidei lasos kameya. Enough of that leather in order to make an amulet. They used to make amulets and put parchment inside, but the amulet pouch was made out of this slightly unprocessed leather. And diftera is the 3rd level up. Demaliach v'kamiach below afitz. It is a type of parchment that has been salted and has had flour process, but has not yet had the gallnut staining process. And again, how much the ramification is, as far as halach is concerned, how much of this do I have to transport in order to be chayiv on Shabbos? The kamashira, and how much is that? Kedei lichtov alav es haget, in order to write a get. And of course, as Rashi surmises, this whole Gemara goes according to the Chachamim, who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says you're not allowed to use diftera for a get, because since it hasn't been stained with the gallnut, it's possible to forge it. But this Gemara holds that it's okay to do that, because we go like the Chachamim. Now, we have to understand what the Chachamim Shita is. The Chachamim say that you are allowed to use an erased parchment, and you're allowed to use diftera. Man Chachamim, so who is this Chachamim? Amar Rabbi El-Azar, Rabbi El-Azarhi. So Rabbi El-Azar says this goes according to Rabbi El-Azar. Now, what is this? It's a very strange phraseology, but really it's Rabbi El-Azar, the Amora, saying that this goes according to Rabbi El-Azar, the Tana. There's Rabbi Elazar ben Chasma and Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. One's a Tana, one's an Amora. And Rabbi Elazar says, it goes like according to Rabbi Elazar, the Tana who said, Da Amar Eidei Mesira Karti. He says that it is not essential that you have witnesses signing on the shtar. And since it's not essential to have witnesses signing on the shtar, who are the essential witnesses? It's the Eidei Mesira. Now, let's think about this for a second. Eidei Mesira need to be present when the get is being given from the man or the man shaliach to the woman. They also, as we learned before, they have to read the get before it's given over to the woman. They have to read it out loud to make sure that everyone understands what the contents are. So let's think about this. If you have Eidei Mesira and they are essential, so then the possibility of falsification really doesn't exist. Because let's say a woman presents her get and the husband protests and he says, you're not divorced, you didn't fulfill the Tanai. She brings forward a get and says, I don't see a Tanai in this get that I had to fulfill. What condition did I have to fulfill in this get? The husband says, it's a forgery, you erased it. She says, what are you talking about? So the Beis Din is going to say, well, if Eidei Mesira are necessary, let's ask the Eidim. When they read the get, before it was delivered to the woman, what did it say? So therefore, the Eidim will be called to testify, and if they say there was a Tanai, so then we know the woman is lying. If they say there wasn't a Tanai, so that we know the woman is telling the truth and the man is lying. But the bottom line is that we don't really care if the parchment is forgeable or not, because we'll be able to verify what was in the get by asking the Eidei Mesira. But let's say you hold that Eidei Chasima Karti. If you hold that Eidei Chasima Karti, then when we want to verify the get, we're not looking for Eidei Mesira. Who are we looking for? All we require is people to verify the signatures on the shtar. We don't even require the Eidim who saw the giving of the get. And if we don't require if we don't require Eidei Mesira, when the man accuses the woman of falsifying or forging the get, she'll say, how can you say this get is forged? I have testimony that these are legitimate signatures. So we call in two local guys who know the people who signed the get all the way in another town, and they'll say, yeah, we recognize these signatures. But is that able to verify whether the get was erased and rewritten? No! And that's why if you hold like Rabbi Meir, who says that Eidei Chasima Karti, that's Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, because there's no way to detect if the get has been forged or not, because we don't require Eidei Mesira, that's why you have to write it on a shtar or on a surface that cannot be forged. That's the machlokas, says the Gemara. Va'amar Rebbe Lazar lo hichsher Rebbe Lazar ela la'alter avol mikanat asara yamim lo chayshinan dil mahava beitana v'ziyafte. Furthermore, Rebbe Lazar says, very consistent with this argument, is that the only time that we say that such a parchment, such as diphthera, is okay, even though it could be erased without detection, is only when it's given to the woman, and then immediately afterwards it's brought to Beis Din, and Beis Din ratifies the get and says, okay, you're divorced. Or they say, fulfill the Tanai, and then you're divorced. But if the woman takes the get and hangs around several days before ratifying it, then if it's written on diphthera, even Rebbe Lazar will agree it's not kosher. Why? Because we're concerned. If the whole issue is to rely on the Eidei Mesira, what if she waits several days or weeks, and then they're called to testify what was written in the get? And it's been several days. We don't remember what was written in the get. We don't remember. So that's why it has to be done right away. If you're going to use diphthera, then you have to be able to ratify the get in Beis Din and have her officially declared a divorced woman immediately upon her receipt in order for the get to be kosher, because that way the Eidei Mesira will be able to be invoked immediately and be able to testify with clear memories. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. He says no. He says even if it's several days later, witnesses will remember if they saw a Tanai in the get. That's something that you don't quickly forget. And therefore he says it doesn't have to be ratified immediately in Beis Din. Another halacha, V'omer Rabbi Lazar lo hichshir Rabbi Lazar ela begitten, avol bishar shtaros lo. And furthermore, Rabbi Lazar says that the only time the diphthera is kosher, according to Rabbi Lazar, is only with a get. Why? Because a get is not something that you have to hold on to for a long period of time. Once a woman receives her get, she's halachically divorced. It's a one-time mechanism. You don't have to hold on to the get for an extended period of time to prove ownership of anything. And therefore, since you have the Eidei Mesira to rely on, it's a one-time thing and you're all set. But when it comes to other shtaros that deal with financial dealings, even if you're relying on the Eidei Mesira, but if you're going to have to hold on to it for an extended period of time, so then who's to say that you'll be able to find the Eidei Mesira? And maybe by that time the Eidei Mesira will have moved away, moved on, and you'll just be left relying completely on the shtar. And if the shtar is written on a surface that's forgeable, so then you got problems. As the pasuk in Yirmiyah says that you should preserve a shtar that has to do with financial dealings, because that way it can endure for many days. And if you're dealing with a shtar that is forgerable over the course of time, then it's not good, even according to Rabbi Lazar and the Chachamim. The Rabbi Yochanan Amar afilu b'shtaros. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees and he says, no, even with financial shtaros you can write it on diphthera and we're not worried that it's going to be forged. What about the pasuk v'aksiv l'man yamdu yomim rabim? What about the pasuk in Yirmiyah that says that you need to make sure that a shtar can be held onto for a long time and to be able to be invoked even after many days? So the Gemara says, Eitz Tova Kamash Malon. It's giving you good advice, but it's not coming to invalidate a get that is written on diphthera. It's just coming to tell you that a wise person will not use diphthera, because diphthera, after all, could be subject to forging, and it's not something that if we can't find. It's something that if we can't find the Eidei Mesira, we're going to be in trouble. Let's go on to the next Mishnah. Hakol ksherin lichtav es haget afilu cheirish shoyta v'katan. Everyone is capable of writing a get, even someone who is not of sound mind, like a cheirish shoyta and a katan, a mute, an insane person, and a minor. So the question, of course, that you should ask is, doesn't a get have to be written lishma? How can this be? So the Gemara will discuss this. Ha'isha koseves es gita v'ha'ish kosev es shovro she'en kiyam haget ela b'chosmav. And finally, a woman is allowed to write her own get, as long as we saw this yesterday, as long as she gives it to her husband for him to be kona, and then he gives it back to her. Because the issue is it has to be v'nosan. He has to transfer ownership from himself to her. So she can write it as long as it belongs to him. And furthermore, when it comes to a shover on a ksuva, when a husband is paying out his wife's ksuva, he can write out the shover, the receipt that normally she's supposed to write for him to give to him, saying that she received the ksuva, right? But she'en kiyum haget ela b'chosmav. And the reason why this is okay is because since the signatures are not going to take place until later, they're going to take place after the husband acquires the get and after the woman acquires the shover to give back to the husband, it's perfectly legit if the writing is done by the other party. Let's take a look at the Gemara. So the Gemara's question is, how can you tell me that a cheirish shoyta and katan are allowed to write a get? It's not done lishma. They don't have knowledge to write it lishma. Amar Rav Huna v'hu shahaya gadol omeid al gabav. So Rav Huna gives an answer that we're going to drop in a minute. Rav Huna gives an answer saying that an adult who is of sound mind is standing over, giving instruction to the minor. And because we assume that there's even though there's no halachic das to a minor, but since the adult is guiding his thought processes, that's sufficiently lishma for the get to be kosher. Now, we'll see in just a minute how this is going to work. So, Amarle Rav Nachman Elameata Obe Kolchavim v'Yisrael Omed al Gabav Hachanami de Kasher. So, are you suggesting that as long as a Jewish adult is standing over a person giving them instructions, even though the person writing is puzzle, it's still a kosher a get? Then it should follow that if a Gentile is writing a get and a Jew is standing over him giving him instructions, that should be a good get. V'chitema hachanami. And maybe you'll say, yes, v'hatanya, obe kol chavim pasel, v'hatanya, obe kol chavim pasel, obe kol chavim pasel. The Brisa says that an obe kol chavim who writes a get, the get is pasel. So the Gemara answers that no, a Gentile adult is different because obe kol chavim l'daite denafshe avid. He says because a Gentile is intelligent. And even though the Jew gives him instructions, write the get for Ploni and Plonis, even though he says, yeah, okay, I'll do it, he might be thinking to himself to write it for another purpose. But a Shota or a Katan, they don't have enough guile to be able to go against the wishes of the person that's giving them the instructions, and that's why it's called Lishma. Hadar Amar Rav Nachman Lav Milsehi Da Amri. Rav Nachman then later retracted, and he says, you know what? I don't agree with Rav Huna. I disagree with Rav Huna, and I'm not going to try and defend that position anymore. But the reality is that because in reality, even if a Gentile writes a get, the get is kosher. And the reason is because the Brisa only, we'll see later on, another Brisa only prohibits a Gentile to be the transporter and deliverer of a get, but that implies that he's kosher to write a get. So then what are you going to do with this Brisa that we just quoted that a Gentile can't write a get? So Hahi Rebbe Lazar he da'amar Eidei Mesira Karti Uba'in Ksiva Lishma. He says that goes according to Rebbe Lazar. In other words, there's a machlokus between Rebbe Lazar and Rebbe Meir whether the get has to be written Lishma or not. According to Rebbe Lazar, you see, there is writing that has to be done Lishma because the Torah says V'chasav la. He has to write a get for her, has to be done Lishma. But part of the machlokas between Rebbe Meir and Rebbe Lazar, as far as which Edom are essential, is what is the writing that the Torah is referring to that has to be done Lishma. According to Rebbe Meir, who requires the Edom to be the signatories in the get, he says it's the signatures of the Edom that has to be done Lishma. And therefore, the rest of the text of the get does not have to be done Lishma, according to Rebbe Meir. And therefore, when our Mishnah says that a Cheresh Shoita v'Katan can write a get, it's not going according to Rebbe Lazar, it's going according to Rebbe Meir. And that's what the Mishnah means. The reason why it's okay for a Cheresh Shoita and Katan to write a get, that's where you read the last line, She'ein kiyam haget ela b'chosmav. That's what the last line is going on. Because since the essential part is the signatures of the Edom, that's the reason why it's okay for the rest of the get not to be written Lishma. And therefore, similarly, an Obe Kol Chavim can also write a get. It doesn't have to be written Lishma. So, V'havadai Obe Kol Chavim adayte denafshe kavin. And that's why a Gentile is going to be writing the get for himself, is not going to be listening to the instructions of the Jew. But that brisa which says that a goy cannot write a get, that goes according to Rebbe Lazar, who says that the essential writing of the get is the text of the get itself. That's why, according to Rebbe Lazar, not like Rav Huna suggested, according to Rebbe Lazar, a Cheresh Shoita Katan cannot write a get, even if an adult is standing over them. No, that'll never be kosher. Our Mishnah is going only according to Rebbe Meir. We'll hold it here for today.